So who thinks real world crypto adoption is happening, or if it's just a myth? Can we have a show of hands? All right, we got 3 people. I hope by the end of this presentation, all of you will turn around and say, yes, it's happening. So I'm the CEO of Blockdata, and there's a couple of things that you should know about me before we start. I'm Dutch, but I was actually born in Brighton, so I'm from the UK. I've lived in Amsterdam for 6 years because, you know, it's kind of one of the world's best cities in that regard. And unfortunately, I am obsessed about the future. So you'll see that the whole company is actually built around trying to understand what's going to happen in the future. And I also wanted to add to this that I'm probably one of the few people you've met that actually has a spoon collection, just as a random fun fact. So who knows about Remittance? Show of hands? Right, so Remittance is one of the core, let's say, global markets. And basically, for those of you who don't know what Remittance is, it's when someone goes and works abroad and then transfers money back to their home country to support their family. Andrea spoke about that earlier today. It is a huge market. That's where $689 billion are transferred, is the current market size. And in 2018, it grew by 10% alone. That's where the main countries that actually receive are India, China, Philippines, Mexico, and France. And the countries that send are the United States, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, and Germany, just to kind of have a little bit of context as to who's sending to who. Western Union, we've all seen their big logo, right? The white and the black, the yellow and the black. And right now they have effectively a monopoly, but I wanted to point out that there is a chance for innovators to enter the space because TransferWise is now the 3rd largest remittance provider. So this is good news, and we've shown that a new tech startup can actually enter the space. Now, blockchain technology fundamentally changes the way that we can look at remittance because it removes the intermediaries from the process. We have one ledger where everyone puts their transactions on, which just removes the need for all of these parties that all take their small cuts of the pie. And that's where what we see is there are actually a large amount of blockchain innovators now tackling specifically the remittance market. We have various large market leaders that actually have blockchain divisions wondering how they can potentially move their core technology to blockchain. You have the market followers, as I mentioned, TransferWise being one of them. But you have this large amount of blockchain innovators that are all looking at remittance and going, yes, this is really interesting. And this is what it looks like if you look at the market growth of remittance in general and where these blockchain companies are actually starting to say, okay, maybe we can use blockchain and crypto to actually transfer money from one country to another. And why I find this particularly amazing is the fact that these companies are effectively completely circumnavigating the entire traditional financial markets infrastructure and doing it with something called crypto. And it actually works. You can sign up for a wide variety of services and transfer money from one country to another, and it works as if you would any other service. I want to point out all of this data is available on our Twitter, so you can actually take the time to really look through. But also what you see here is these companies have large team sizes. So these are not small startups that are 2 people, but actually companies at this point. And that's where we did a lot of research into understanding, okay, why would people be wanting to use blockchain for this? And that's where we came out with numbers like this. Blockchain-based transactions are on average 388 times faster and 127 times cheaper. And that's where if you look at Western Union, you could be paying $9.70 for a transaction, but if you're to use any of the crypto-based solutions to make that transaction, not only are you settling faster in terms of transaction time, but it's also going to cost you less money. Now, remittance is mostly for people that live below the poverty line, so that's where any extra % of fee comes out of their pocket, and that doesn't really seem fair. And if we go back to Andres' talk about universal basic finance, this is something that is actually happening. You know, companies are tackling this space and the services exist. Another industry that I wanted to point out that's more blockchain focused is trade finance. Does everyone know trade finance? Show of hands? Cool, I like that. So within banking and finance, trade finance is actually the 3rd most popular topic for blockchain innovation. And that's also because when you have a centralized ledger, or maybe you're running on a decentralized network, I'm not going to go into permissioned versus permissionless chains, you cut out a lot again of these actors. And that's because in trade finance, what I wanted to point out here is 90% of interactions are ignore and transmit. So basically that means that the data is just flowing through these databases of all of these companies sitting in the middle. They get paid for a service where they actually don't do anything with the data other than effectively certify and stick a stamp on a piece of paper. Sounds inefficient to me. I don't know if you guys agree with me there. And that's where it's super interesting that some of the largest institutions in the world are joining consortia that are tackling the trade finance problem using blockchain-based solutions or distributed ledger technology. Now, some of note here is ING, obviously being Dutch, but ING is part of 3 big consortia, and that's a trend that we see of corporates, is they're not just focused on one area of the world, but they're focused on seeing how can they get as much coverage across the world as possible to make sure they're represented in all markets. There's also other consortia tackling this. Ones of use, obviously in India, of note, are in India, and also InterSwitch, which is focused in Nigeria. So we see this isn't just something focused on Western society, but it's actually a global trend. That's where we see that products are actually being developed on the Corda platform. Okay, Corda is a private chain, but the point I want to get across to you is that this is no longer hypothetical stuff, but actual products that are going into production. There's 2 here that are live in March 2018, are actually being used. And if I go back here and look at TradeLens, they've actually tracked 300 million transactions on their chain. That's quite a lot. But going further, what are some other general trends that we see, and how is crypto actually being used? Because one of the big problems that we have is if I have a Bitcoin and I go to a store, I can't use that Bitcoin to buy something at that store because I have to then transfer the money to fiat and then use that. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Sorry, I spoke too quickly. But that's where, if we also look at the Forbes 50, that's where we actually see a large amount of companies are actually developing on Ethereum and are not too focused, well, they are still doing it, but on these private chain solutions. As I said, all of this data is online, so I'd recommend. And going back to what I just said in terms of the Bitcoin transactions, that's where, if we look at merchants, so what happens is when I make a transfer of 10 euros when I buy a packet of cigarettes, the merchant has to pay a small fee, so they actually get less money in their pocket. Now, that's where the traditional ones online, PayPal and Stripe, they're charging 2.9%, and they only accept fiat. Whereas there is a wide variety of now crypto-based payment gateways that allow you to use crypto payments to buy a service, any service that you could possibly want, as long as the merchant is actually integrating those. The fee is a lot less, and that's where it actually doesn't take a couple of days for the merchant to actually receive the asset, the money, but actually, if you're using things like the Lightning Network, it gets settled instantly. So if you look at the ecosystem from this perspective, it actually means the infrastructure is now there. It's just about adoption. These are all, again, a wide list of startups that are all building merchant solutions to solve this exact problem. This is not some small thing with one startup anymore. These are large companies that are trying to innovate in the space to allow people like you to pay with crypto. Now, during Consensus, Flexer, which is from the Winklevoss, kind of connected to the Winklevoss brothers, that's where you now have, in the US, 19,000 brick and mortar stores that you can walk into and pay with cryptocurrency, with Bitcoin, the Gemini stablecoin, Bcash, and Ethereum. That's 19,000 stores that pretty much overnight suddenly accepted crypto. The infrastructure is there. That's what I'm trying to say. But that's where one of the big things that's turned people off from using crypto is in fact the volatility of the market. If the transaction, the price changes while that transaction takes place, then someone misses out. Someone is not happy with that transaction. And that's why stablecoins are very interesting. Because now an asset can actually keep its value no matter how long it takes to translate. But again, the fact is stablecoins run on a network that's completely independent from the traditional financial markets infrastructure. It does no longer go through, for example, the SWIFT pipelines, but rather it uses blockchain. And that's where we have a lot of funding. So Tether, over $1 billion. We're not going to go into the controversy here. USD Coin, eToro X is also bringing out theirs, and a wide variety of others. And that's where 72 stablecoins over the last couple of years have been released and are still alive. That's an important thing in crypto. Everyone can say an amount of projects, but which ones are still active? That's the important metric. And that's where we see in 2018, it was really exciting because it was meant to be the year of the stablecoin. But actually what we're seeing moving into 2019 is already there have been 104 stablecoin projects announced, but we're only in June. So we're very interested to see how this adoption is going to increase. And also to see what happens to these ones in red here that are currently in development, because, as I said again, the infrastructure is now starting to be in place to transfer assets from anywhere to anywhere without the financial markets infrastructure. So, I'm not sure how I've done for time, but who thinks that crypto is the future? Because, again, I want to reiterate this. If there's one thing you can take away from today, it's the fact that you can now be a participant in the crypto network and live your life day to day without touching this financial big system of banks and regulation's a tough one. So that's where, as I said, crypto is the future, and it's not here tomorrow, but it's here today, and it takes people like you to actually go and innovate and use this crypto infrastructure to actually make sure that the ecosystem develops. So obviously I'm here from Blockdata, and the reason why we have a software to help people understand, what's going on in the ecosystem. So that's where if any of you from a company and you want to understand really the data that's behind the stuff that's on here, you just have to let me know. And that's because we collect a lot of data by hand because we're trying to build an enterprise-grade data tool here. And before you ask, yes, that means it's very, very hard. Not being community-driven in short means that we have to do everything ourselves, and that's why we're building our HypeWord proprietary collective intelligence engine to be able to solve that. And as I said, I'm obsessed about the future, and I love it when people come and ask me what's happening now and what's happening in the future. So that's why we're trying to help the world understand how the future is being built, and things like the universal basic finance from Andreas earlier, but doing it while it's being built. We're not trying to do retrospective here, but we're trying to track this development of the ecosystem in real time. Thanks a lot. I hope you learned something. And again, I want to remind you that all of the data is available for free on our Twitter, so you can actually take the time to go and read into it. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. I guess we've got a bit of time. If anybody has any questions, are you happy to answer some questions?
Sure, if there's questions, I don't know.
Does anybody have any questions for Jonathan?
What's the next industry? You are looking at this from a financial perspective.
Yep.
Is there another industry that you say, I don't know, real estate, pharmaceuticals, I know these names are falling, but what's the industry you think is going to be the next?
I think if we look at supply chain and the fact that more and more there's start to be some consortia being formed around just supply chain in that regard. And what's interesting is the fact that these companies, it takes a lot of education, but once these companies set up these blockchain innovation departments, they tend to start to realize the benefits. And as was shown in other parts of our research, if you look into it, is just the cost savings that can actually be brought from it. But that's where pharmaceutical also falls under supply chain. So.
We've seen in the past various merchants and businesses accept cryptocurrencies, and then it's just an experimental phase, and then they withdraw. Do you think this time is different?
Yeah. So it's a lot to do with the infrastructure, and especially in the Netherlands, one of the big things of merchants accepting crypto payments is they have this thing of, how do I do tax? Like, how do I fit this into my traditional, basically like my software that does all of my accounting for me? But that's where I think stablecoins is very interesting, because now if you transfer €1 or $1 through a stablecoin, it uses the exact same numbers as if you would accept a euro. But that's also, now there's the amount of tools that are coming out and the products are being developed. The market is definitely much maturer than it was, for example, in 2017. So I'm not sure, I hope it's going to be better, but that's where I think this competition and the amount of stuff that's going on in the space should give more access. Also, what I wanted to mention in terms of regulation, that's where also we're in a different position than we were in 2017, where people are a little bit more open to it. And I think in the EU, there's going to be the AML directive, to see, how you can, who can actually buy and sell, like buy crypto. You have to, on your wallet and on your exchange, make sure you always go through a KYC procedure. If you enter into this protected environment, then there should actually not be much regulatory questions about, okay, if a euro is a euro, then let's just use it.
What do you think is the biggest hurdle that's stopping mass adoption? Is it costs? Is it people that are uneducated or
Yeah.
knowing about it?
So removing the whole scalability issue, right? Lots of people like to use that as an excuse, but as Andreas said earlier, we will fix it at some point. It's purely adoption. I see it's education around people like you and I. Are we actually using crypto? If we have a Bitcoin in our wallet, most of us in this room want to use it, keep it because we think the price is going to go up. But that's the wrong way of looking at it. Rather think, okay, how can I maybe make one crypto transaction per day? How could I pay my bills in crypto? Because if the demand comes from the community and society itself, what I'm trying to show you here is actually the tooling and the companies are building solutions for you to do that, but society just has to want it.
You mentioned about the Gemini or Winklevoss enabling of bricks and mortar stores for crypto payments. Do you have any data on user adoption and also user experience of this new service?
If you have it, I want it.
Okay.
That's the very short answer. I think lots of people are looking for that data right now, but that's also one of the beauties of, for example, Chainalysis. Putting all the controversy aside, these are the guys that can actually answer that question pretty accurately.
What data do you have on real estate and blockchain?
Not too much right now. However, there is a consortium called Fiber. Have you heard of them? It's FIBREE, and they're right now building a data set of all real estate related projects. If you contact me, I can connect you with the guy. He has the data.
I guess it's just a question about what's the next report that you're working on now?
Stablecoins.
All right.
Okay, yeah. Oh, one more?
Is it? Yeah, testing it. Just thinking, what do you think it would? What factors do you think it takes for the average Joe to adopt cryptocurrencies?
Would you like the provocative answer or like the non-provocative answer?
I don't mind either way.
I'm going to say recession and a complete lack of trust in terms of government, society, banks, the financial infrastructure that's in place. Because fundamentally, what does crypto assets bring to you is, and as Andreas says, you become your own bank. Right now, society, I would argue, this is up for debate, actually whether they already trust the financial markets and what's going on there, especially after 2008. There's talk about shadow debt markets and all of this stuff. If the financial markets infrastructure, quote unquote, would collapse, now what we can do through all of these services is we can just move on to a different version of the financial infrastructure. It's now pretty much plug and play at this point, minus scalability.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan. Big round of applause.